Hello folks, and welcome to the Ocean State Cuisine. In today's video, we're going to be showing you how to make a wedding chicken Italian style soup. This is fantastic. This is definitely a soup you cannot buy in a can. They may claim on the can that it's Italian wedding chicken soup, but it doesn't taste anything like it. So the first thing we're going to go over is the type of chicken that we're using. Back in the old days, all my relatives, my mother, my grandmother, they used to use what they call fowl. So fowl could be anything from duck to certain kinds of chicken and even quail. And the reason for this is because it contains a good amount of oils, but it's not too greasy, which also adds tons of flavor. But in this day and age, it's not typical to find fowl in most markets throughout the United States. So my choice is chicken thighs. I used to use chicken breast, but it didn't have the flavor and it was a little more dry texture compared to the chicken thighs. So for the amount of soup that I'm making today, I use 3 thighs. And what I do is that I take the skin off of 2 thighs and I leave the skin on 1 thigh. Because you don't want a greasy soup. You don't want to have a film of grease floating to the top of your soup. So all you have to do is just peel the skin off of 2 of them. And the skin pulls off rather easy. So now next, what we're going to do is we're going to get a pot, a smaller pot, and we're going to fill it up with some water. And we're going to bring this up to like a medium simmer. And then next I get an onion, a pretty nice size onion, and I cut it into 4s. And then I put that into the water. Next what I do is that I get a bunch of celery, and I lap off the tops of the celery that we normally don't eat. You know, the parts that's got the leaves connected to it. Or sometimes I'll even add the bottom of the bunch of celery, where like the root is. I'll just cut that off and add that to the pot. If all you have is clean celery, then get the actual stalks of the celery, just cut them into like 2 or 3 sections and put them in the pot. But we're going to need some celery for a little bit later. And then what I add next to it is garlic. So you could either use minced garlic, cloves of garlic, or even garlic powder. And then some salt and some pepper. Now next I'm going to add a heaping teaspoon to the pot of this chicken powder. If you don't have chicken powder, you could use chicken bouillon cubes. You could use like a chicken stock paste. To me, the main flavor that we taste in chicken soup is sodium. You know, even though you have all the other ingredients in there, but sodium is definitely one of the main things when it comes to chicken soup. If you ever look at the back of a Camel soup can, you're going to see that there's quite a bit of sodium in that soup. So again, when it comes to making a soup like this, you want to go by tasting it. But see, right now, this is the first stage of the soup. We're not finished. This is going to go into a larger pot where we're going to add the rest of the ingredients in the stock. So we're not looking for a strong soup flavor at this time. What I'm mainly doing right now is cooking the chicken. And the celery, the onion, and everything else is just going to add flavor to the chicken. And we could see right here, this is pretty much what the broth is starting to look like. We could see it's got just a little bit of grease, which we do want, without it being too greasy. Now, you could bring it up to like a medium simmer, depending on how fast you want to cook this. And a lot of times I just put it on low and just let the chicken take its time cooking because I'm not in no big rush. Overall, I did it about a medium simmer and it finished in about 40 minutes. So now I'm taking the chicken out of the pot. And then I set it aside and let it cool a bit. And the piece of chicken that I left the skin on, I'm now going to take off. So now we want all of our chicken thighs to be skinless. And if there's any excess fats clinging to the chicken, you could trim them off now with a knife. We used all the fats that we wanted to use now. A good way to tell if the chicken is done is just take one of the thighs out, see if you could pull it apart a little bit with a fork. But again, we're still going to be simmering the chicken, so it doesn't have to be too tender at this point. You just don't want it to have any blood or anything like that. But I do cook it enough at this stage where it is edible. Now what I'm doing is that I'm sifting out all the big chunks of this into the actual pot now that we're going to be transferring the soup to. So I'm going to be taking out the bits of onion, the celery, and any other chunks that are left behind. And I'm using a nice size either tea strainer or flour sifter to get this done. And the smell in the house right now is incredible. Now if that's not a homemade soup, I don't know what is. And now we could see that we got a real nice looking chicken broth. But now that's not enough broth for actually the whole soup. You could make your own broth yourself as long as you got the chicken bouillon or the powder. But I'm actually going to add some boxed chicken broth to mine just to top it off a bit. Now don't fill it up to the top because we still haven't added all the stock yet. Now the container of chicken broth that I'm using right here is 32 ounces. And it also says on the box that it's 2 pounds. So now we're just going to add this to our broth. I'd rather use this broth than actual water because it just has more flavor. Now I'm going to start preparing the chicken. And I always think that it's best to use tongs when it comes to handling food like this, so it doesn't fall apart and all that. Now this is why I like the chicken to cool a bit, because I end up ripping it, a good amount of it apart with just my hands. So over here I'm just trimming off any excess fats and things along that nature, because you don't want a spoonful of fat. And I said the heck with the knife and all this stuff. You know, we could see on how the chicken looks. It's cooked at a perfect temperature right here. Then I just decided to use my hands. And I just try to take off the wholesome parts of the chicken. I don't want any cartilage mixed in, again, any fats. So I'm basically taking the meat off right now from the bone. Better than those little tiny pieces that you could hardly see from the canned soups, right? Now, so that the chicken could fit on the spoon, or in the spoon, we're just going to cut it up into little chunks right now, but not too small. The main reason why I'm making this is my sister went in for hip surgery and she loves this soup. So she says, if you make a big batch of this, I won't have to bug you to always make me meals. We could just heat up some soup. Now we are going to get some fresh stalks of celery now, and we're going to cut them up. And we're going to add this to the soup. The celery adds a real nice texture and flavor to the soup. And then once I'm done preparing everything, like the chicken and all that, I put it into the broth now of the soup on about a medium simmer. So again, we're going to prepare our celery, and I use about 3 stalks for the amount of soup that I'm making today. And I cut my celery usually lengthwise in half, so that you're not getting a big piece of celery in your spoon. When I make soups, stews, anything like that, chowders, I try to think of when we're going to eat it and getting a mixture on your spoon without having pieces too big. So again, we're going to dice this up. Again, it's 3 stalks that I used, and we're going to add it now to our soup stock or our broth. Now next I'm going to add some carrots to this. Now carrots is something I don't always add to my soup. The celery is a must. But the carrots, it adds nice color to it, and it gives you more stock for your soup. Depending on my mood, sometimes I'd rather have my soup without the carrots. Because an Italian style chicken soup is loaded with stock, loaded with ingredients. I mean, it's a meal by itself. Now, these are the only carrots that I happen to have on hand at this moment. Usually I use the actual carrots, and I just dice them up. So I'm just cutting these up into bite-sized pieces, and I'm going to add this now to my soup stock or my broth. It looks good, and it even sounded good, and we're not even nearly done with this stock of this soup. So right now we just got our carrots, our celery, and our chicken added to the broth. And now let's give it a closer look and see what we got so far. So already this has 80% more stock than anything you would get in a can, or probably in most restaurants. Okay, now we need to start adding our seasoning. And I'm starting off with some dried oregano. I really like oregano in my soup, so I end up adding quite a bit, but you don't have to add this much because oregano is rather strong. Now next I'm going to use some garlic powder. Even though we used garlic at the start of the video, I'm going to add a little more because we added more broth and more stock now to the soup, so we have to compensate. Next, I'm going to add some dried parsley to this. Mainly, it gives it a nice color, and you don't have to worry about adding too much parsley because parsley does not have a strong flavor at all. It's mainly used here as a garnish. And because I didn't have any basil on hand, I'm going to add some Italian seasoning. Italian seasoning has basil inside of it, but it also has some oregano, I think. I'm not 100% sure. So I'm just going to add a little bit of this to my soup. Next, I'm going to add some salt, but I'm not going to add a lot of salt because I use the chicken powder to add the sodium flavor really to my soup. And plus we added more broth to the soup, so we need to add a little more salt. And then some fresh ground black pepper. And this I like adding a good amount. And now we're going to give it a nice stir. And look at that soup. And we still haven't added some of the main ingredients yet to the soup stock. And that's what our soup looks like so far. It's got a little bit of oil on the top, which just adds excellent flavor to it, but yet not too greasy. And once given it a nice stir, it just blends everything really, really well. And then with a teaspoon, I add about 1 heaping teaspoon and a flat half teaspoon of chicken powder. And again, this is where tasting it every now and then is really going to be important, so you can see if it's either too salty or if it's too bland. If you're using bouillon cubes, depending on the size of the cubes that you're using, but for the smaller cubes, I recommend adding about 3 at a time, giving it a while to simmer, taste it, and see what it's like. And then adjust it from there. Now, when I lived in Rhode Island, we always put this herb in our soup. It's called escarole. And it is fantastic. It just adds a nice little background flavor to the soup. And with a knife, you just like chop it a bit, put it in your soup, you're good to go. Now they also sell it sometimes in cans. It's not as good as the fresh escarole, but it's better than nothing. But right now where I live, I can't find any escarole. There is some herbs that are close to it, like arugula, and people even say sometimes spinach. So if you do live in an area with escarole, I do advise trying this in your chicken soup. Now at this stage, we want to take up the soup to like a hot simmer. And then once it gets to a hot simmer, you're going to want to lower it now to pretty much a low simmer. And now we're going to let this all simmer now for about an hour. Again, to a very light simmer. And the reason being is because the rest of the ingredients that we're going to add, they only take about 5 to 10 minutes to cook. You don't want to overcook these. So a good indication to tell if this cooked enough is that the carrots now and the celery should be rather soft, or al dente. But don't make them too soft where they're like mush, because you're going to be reheating this soup and we're still going to be cooking it just a tad longer once we add the rest of our ingredients. Now time to add some love. Okay, so we're going to start off. For this amount of soup, I used 4 hard-boiled eggs. They don't have to be very hard because they're going to continue to cook a little bit too in the soup. But just enough where you could cut them up like this and work with them. So I just cut them up into like bite-sized pieces that can fit on the spoon. And this adds such a great flavor and everything to this soup. And again, we don't want to add these ingredients till about the last 10 or 15 minutes of cooking the soup. Next, one of my favorites in this soup, mini meatballs. That's right. And man, are they good in this soup. Now, I'm not going to show you guys today how to make the meatballs, just a basic meatball recipe, but I am going to be coming out with a meatball recipe in the near future. If you need some guidance or an idea, use the same recipe that I used for my meatloaf video. But because we don't use a lot of the meatballs, it's not the main thing in this soup, it's the chicken that is. This is just an accent and just something else to bite into. I literally only used for this 1 hamburger patty. So if you're used to using like a whole egg when you're making regular meatballs, you only want to use a little bit of an egg, or maybe just a half an egg when it comes to making these. And now you could add them to the soup. Okay, and what's chicken soup without noodles? And we tend to use small pastas for ours. We don't use the long stringy noodles. It's just easy to eat this way. And my mother used to use these things called egg flakes. They were delicious. They were square little pastas. They were excellent in chicken soup. But we can't find them any longer. I'm not sure if they make them anymore. So these are small little pastinis that I'm using today. Now some people will pour the dry pasta right into the soup. I don't. I like to cook it off just a couple of minutes to get rid of that excess starch. Now I did forget to mention earlier that I do cover the soup now. So I put it on very low, because whenever we cover up soup and stuff, they're going to heat up a lot quicker and faster now once there's a lid on it. And this is going to make it where the broth doesn't evaporate. Now something you have to be careful about is adding too much pasta. Because as this cooks and sits in the refrigerator overnight, that pasta is going to keep expanding because it's taking in the excess moisture of the soup. So I ended up using about maybe 1.5 cups of pasta that I'm adding to the soup right now. Maybe almost 2 cups. If you have to add a little more pasta later on, you could just pour it straight into the soup. Okay, now we're getting there, guys. I know this is a pretty long video, but again, this is a pretty intense soup. And now we're going to add in our eggs and meatballs. And that's pretty much it for all the ingredients for this soup. But you want to talk about a fulfilling stock soup? This is it, guys. And remember, give it a few good stirs, give it a nice taste test, make sure that the chicken powder or the bouillon is where you want it to be. Because again, that is the main source of the flavor of the soup. Now the eggs are going to start falling apart, the yolks are going to separate from the whites and all that, but that's still okay. That's going to happen, you can't help it. Now I'm just going to bring it up a little bit in temperature, and then we're just going to put a lid on it. And then after about a minute or so, I'm going to lower it back down to low and let it just cook for about 5 or 10 minutes, then it's ready to serve. And look at that, nice and stocky. Like I said earlier, this is a meal all by itself. And again, the pasta is still going to continue to swell up a bit more. So give it about 5 to 10 more minutes, see how swelled up the pasta gets. We could see right there on that spoonful, we got a good amount of pasta right there. So I'm happy with that amount. And that's pretty much it, folks. That's how I make my Italian style wedding chicken soup. Now, I recommend if you like Parmesan cheese, use it. It is fantastic. I can't eat this soup without it. Get yourself some oyster crackers or a nice hard crusted Italian bread on the side with some butter. It's delicious. So, make your family this for Thanksgiving or Christmas. I think they will be very impressed. I just want to say one other thing now. Don't add the Parmesan cheese to the actual pot of soup. You don't want to do that, it'll turn into glue. You want to add it to your individual servings. Okay, folks, I hope that you enjoyed this chicken wedding soup that we made today. And again, thanks for watching the Ocean State Cuisine. Feel free to sub up for more delicious recipes coming your way. Comment down below because, as always, we love to hear from you. Until the next time, you guys have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.